Now, right now, as you're watching this, there's probably something you know you should be doing, something important, something that could change your life, advance your career, improve your health, or deepen your relationships. You know exactly what it is, and you're not doing it. Instead, you're here consuming content, scrolling, watching, researching, anything except the one thing that actually matters. And there's a voice in your head that's been whispering the same lie for so long you've started to believe it. You're just lazy. But what if I told you that voice is wrong? What if I told you that what you've labeled as laziness is actually one of the most sophisticated defense mechanisms your brain has ever created? What if the very thing you've been judging yourself for is actually your mind's way of protecting you from something it perceives as life-threatening? You're not lazy, you're scared. And once you understand what you're really afraid of, everything changes. The procrastination makes sense, the avoidance makes sense, the endless cycle of starting and stopping, of good intentions and failed follow-through, of knowing what to do but somehow never doing it, it all makes perfect sense. Because your brain isn't broken. Your willpower isn't defective, your character isn't flawed, you're just human, and your human brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you from perceived threats to your survival. The problem is, in our modern world, the threats aren't saber-toothed tigers. They're much more subtle, much more psychological, and much more devastating to the human spirit. They're the threat of failure, of judgment, of not being good enough, of being seen as inadequate, of discovering that maybe you're not who you thought you were. And here's the cruel irony. The very mechanism that's designed to protect you from these threats, avoidance, is the thing that guarantees you'll experience them. But stay with me, because understanding this isn't just about fixing your productivity. This is about understanding one of the deepest patterns of human suffering and the key to breaking free from it. This is about discovering that the thing you've been running from might be the very thing that will set you free. What if the cure for laziness isn't more discipline, but more courage? What if the solution to procrastination isn't better time management, but better fear management? What if everything you've been told about motivation and willpower is missing the most important piece of the puzzle? We're about to dive into the hidden psychology of avoidance, the neuroscience of fear, and the surprising truth about what really drives human behavior. And by the end, you'll understand not just why you avoid the things you know you should do, but how to finally do them. The story that reveals everything? Let me tell you about Marcus. Brilliant guy, master's degree in engineering, sharp mind, everyone who meets him thinks he's destined for great things. But Marcus has a secret. For 3 years he's been telling people he's working on a revolutionary app. He talks about it with passion, describes the features in detail, explains how it's going to change everything. His friends are excited, his family's proud, potential investors are interested. But here's what Marcus hasn't told anyone. He's never written a single line of code, not one, in 3 years. Every morning Marcus wakes up with the intention to start. He opens his laptop, pulls up the development environment and checks email, then social media, then news, then research about his competitors, then research about the research. Before he knows it, it's evening and he's accomplished everything except the one thing that matters. His friends think he's a perfectionist. His family thinks he's just taking his time. Marcus thinks he's lazy. But watch what happens when Marcus finally talks to a therapist about his procrastination problem. What would happen? The therapist asks if you wrote the first line of code and the app turned out to be terrible. Marcus laughs. Well, then I'd know I'm not as smart as everyone thinks I am. And what would that mean? It would mean I've been lying to myself and everyone else about what I'm capable of. And then what? Then I'd have to accept that maybe I'm just average, maybe I'm not special, maybe all these years of people telling me I'm brilliant and destined for great things were wrong. There it is. Marcus isn't avoiding writing code because he's lazy. He's avoiding it because as long as he doesn't try, he can maintain the possibility of greatness. As long as the app remains unwritten, it can be perfect in his mind. As long as he doesn't test his abilities, he doesn't have to face the possibility that they're not as extraordinary as everyone believes. Marcus isn't lazy. Marcus is terrified of being ordinary. And here's where this gets really interesting. Marcus's story isn't unique. It's universal. The details change, but the pattern is everywhere. The person who talks about writing a novel but never starts the first chapter isn't lazy. They're terrified of discovering they don't have the talent they've always imagined they possessed. The person who knows they should exercise but never makes it to the gym isn't lazy. They're afraid of the discomfort that comes with growth, or afraid of not seeing immediate results, or afraid of being judged by others who seem more fit. The person who should call that friend, apply for that job, have that difficult conversation, take that risk, they're not avoiding it because they don't care. They're avoiding it because they care too much. They're afraid of the outcome. They're afraid of rejection, of failure, of success, of change, of staying the same. But here's what Marcus discovered when he finally understood this. The fear of being ordinary was more paralyzing than actually being ordinary ever could be. The fear of failure was causing more suffering than failure itself ever would. The fear of judgment was more devastating than any judgment he might actually receive. And here's the plot twist that changes everything. 6 months after that therapy session, Marcus launched his app. It wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the world-changing innovation he'd imagined. It was good, solid, useful, ordinary. And Marcus was happier than he'd been in years, because he'd discovered something profound. The fear of being ordinary had kept him from being anything at all, and being ordinary was infinitely better than being paralyzed by the need to be extraordinary. The psychology and philosophy behind the fear. Now let's dive into the science of why this happens, because understanding the mechanism is the key to breaking free from it. Dr. Tim Peichel, one of the world's leading researchers on procrastination, has spent decades studying this phenomenon. His research reveals something shocking. Procrastination has nothing to do with time management and everything to do with emotion management. When we avoid doing something important, we're not managing our time poorly. We're managing our emotions. We're trying to avoid the negative feelings associated with the task, the fear of failure, the anxiety of judgment, the discomfort of uncertainty, the threat to our self-image. Procrastination, Peichel discovered, is emotion-focused coping. It's a way of dealing with negative emotions by avoiding the source of those emotions. It's not a character flaw, it's a survival strategy. But here's where it gets fascinating. The brain doesn't distinguish between physical threats and psychological threats. To your amygdala, the alarm center in your brain, the fear of writing a bad email and the fear of being attacked by a predator trigger the same fight or flight response. Dr. Joseph Ledoux's neuroscience research shows us that the amygdala processes threats faster than the rational mind can evaluate them. It sees potential threat and immediately activates avoidance behaviors before your conscious mind even understands what's happening. So when you sit down to work on something important and suddenly feel the urge to do literally anything else, that's not laziness, that's your amygdala doing its job. It's trying to protect you from what it perceives as danger. But what danger could there be in writing an email or starting a project or making a phone call? The answer lies in what psychologists call core fears, the deep, often unconscious beliefs we have about ourselves and our place in the world. Dr. David Burns identified several common core fears that drive avoidance. The fear of failure. If I try and fail, it will prove I'm inadequate. The fear of success. If I succeed, people will expect more from me than I can deliver. The fear of judgment. If I put myself out there, people will see my flaws. The fear of rejection. If I reach out, they might say no. The fear of responsibility. If I start this, I'll have to finish it. The fear of change. If this works, my life will be different, and different is scary. Each of these fears has roots in our evolutionary psychology. For millions of years, being rejected by the tribe meant death. Being seen as inadequate meant losing resources and protection. Failure meant not surviving to reproduce. Our brains are still running on software designed for a world where social rejection was literally life-threatening. The Stoic philosophers understood this connection between fear and avoidance thousands of years before modern neuroscience proved it. Epictetus taught that we're not disturbed by events themselves, but by our judgments about events. Marcus Aurelius wrote about how our perceptions shape our reality, how the stories we tell ourselves about what might happen determine our emotional state in the present. Seneca went even deeper, observing that, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The fear of what might happen if we take action is almost always worse than what actually happens when we do take action. Eastern philosophy offers another lens. Buddhist teachings describe what they call the second arrow of suffering. The first arrow is the initial discomfort. the natural anxiety that comes with doing something challenging. The second arrow is the suffering we create by judging ourselves for feeling the first arrow. So you feel nervous about making an important phone call, that's the first arrow. Then you judge yourself for being nervous, that's the second arrow. Then you avoid making the call to avoid feeling nervous, that's the third arrow. Then you judge yourself for being lazy and undisciplined, that's the fourth arrow. Before you know it, you're drowning in self-created suffering, all because you tried to avoid a momentary discomfort. But here's where modern psychology adds a crucial insight. The people who seem most lazy are often the most sensitive. They feel emotions more intensely, process experiences more deeply, and are more affected by potential negative outcomes. Their avoidance isn't a sign of not caring, it's a sign of caring too much. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive people shows that approximately 1 in 5 people, or about 20% of the population, has a nervous system that processes sensory information more deeply. These people aren't just more sensitive to physical stimuli, they're more sensitive to emotional and social stimuli too. They feel rejection more acutely, experience criticism more intensely, and are more affected by the possibility of failure. For these people, what others see as laziness is actually a heightened form of self-protection. Their nervous systems are trying to shield them from emotional overwhelm. Their avoidance isn't indifference, it's hypersensitivity disguised as indifference. This explains why traditional productivity advice often fails. Just do it doesn't work when it feels emotionally dangerous. Push through your resistance doesn't help when resistance is your brain's way of keeping you safe. Stop making excuses really misses the point when the excuses are serving a protective function. The contrast that reveals the truth. Let me show you the difference between what we think motivation looks like and what it actually looks like. The mythology of motivation. Successful people are naturally disciplined. They wake up excited to work. They don't struggle with procrastination because they have superior willpower. They're just built different, more driven, more focused, more committed to their goals. The reality of motivation. The most successful people are often the most scared people who've learned to act despite their fear. They're not more disciplined, they're more practiced at doing difficult things while feeling scared. They don't have superior willpower, they have superior fear management strategies. Think about this for a second. Who's more motivated? The person who finds everything easy and effortless, or the person who finds everything terrifying but does it anyway? The person who's never been afraid of failure, or the person who's deeply afraid of failure but pursues their goals despite that fear? The person who's naturally confident, or the person who's full of self-doubt but acts with courage anyway? Real motivation isn't the absence of fear, it's action in the presence of fear. Real discipline isn't feeling like doing something, it's doing something especially when you don't feel like it. Here's what changes when you understand this. Instead of judging yourself for feeling scared, you start honoring yourself for feeling scared and moving forward anyway. Instead of comparing your internal experience to others' external results, you start comparing your current courage to your past courage. Instead of trying to eliminate fear, you start learning to dance with it. Look at the people you most admire. I guarantee that if you knew their full story, you'd discover that their greatest achievements came not from moments when they felt confident, but from moments when they felt terrified and chose to act anyway. The entrepreneur who built $1 million business felt scared every day for the first 2 years. The artist whose work hangs in galleries felt like a fraud every time they picked up a brush. The writer whose books inspire millions spent years convinced they had nothing valuable to say. The difference between people who achieve their goals and people who don't isn't the presence or absence of fear. It's their relationship with fear. People who stay stuck see fear as a stop sign. I feel scared, therefore I shouldn't do this. People who break through see fear as information. I feel scared, which means this matters to me. People who stay paralyzed see fear as evidence of inadequacy. I'm afraid because I'm not ready, not qualified, not good enough. People who achieve breakthroughs see fear as evidence of growth. I'm afraid because I'm about to do something that will expand who I am. This shift in perspective changes everything. Suddenly the fear that was once your enemy becomes your compass. The anxiety that was once paralyzing becomes energizing. The resistance that was once a wall becomes a doorway. But here's where most people get stuck. They think that understanding this intellectually is enough. They think that knowing fear is normal will make the fear go away. But fear doesn't disappear just because you understand it. Understanding fear just changes what you do with it, and that's where the real work begins. The hidden faces of fear. Let's get specific about what fear actually looks like in daily life, because most people don't recognize their fears as fears. They experience them as everything except what they actually are. Fear disguised as perfectionism. I can't start until I have the perfect plan, the perfect setup, the perfect moment. This isn't about high standards, it's about avoiding the vulnerability of imperfection. Perfectionism is fear wearing a mask of excellence. Fear disguised as research. I need to learn more before I begin. This can be legitimate, but often it's just a sophisticated form of avoidance. Research becomes a way to feel productive while avoiding the risk of actually producing something that could be judged. Fear disguised as busy work. I'd work on my important project, but I have so many urgent things to handle first. The urgent things become a shield against the important things because urgent feels safer than important. Urgency is external pressure. Someone else is demanding action. Importance is internal pressure. You are demanding growth from yourself. Fear disguised as rationalization. Now isn't the right time. I need to wait until... The conditions are never quite right for doing something scary. There's always a reason to wait. Always something that needs to happen first. Always a better moment, just around the corner. Fear disguised as overwhelm. There's just too much to do. I don't know where to start. Often this isn't actually about the volume of work, it's about the emotional intensity of starting. The overwhelm is your nervous system's way of shutting down when it feels overstimulated by possibility and threat simultaneously. Fear disguised as distraction. I was going to work on my project, but then... social media, news, entertainment, other people's content. Anything to avoid sitting with the discomfort of your own creative process, your own uncertainty, your own vulnerability. But here's the pattern within the pattern. All of these disguises share one common feature. They keep you in motion without requiring you to risk anything. They create the feeling of productivity without the vulnerability of creation. They let you stay busy while avoiding the terror of significance. Dr. Steven Pressfield calls this resistance in his book, The War of Art. He describes it as an invisible force that arises whenever we try to move from a lower realm to a higher realm, whenever we try to evolve beyond our current limitations. Resistance, Pressfield observes, is most powerful when the stakes are highest. It's strongest when we're about to do something that truly matters to us, something that could genuinely change our lives. The more important the project, the more intense the resistance. This explains why you can easily binge-watch Netflix for hours, but can't sit down to work on your passion project for 20 minutes. Netflix doesn't threaten your identity. Your passion project does. Netflix can't fail, you're just consuming it. Your passion project could fail, and that failure might mean something about who you are. Here's where it gets really interesting. The things we avoid most persistently are often the things our souls are calling us toward most urgently. That novel you've been meaning to write for 5 years, your soul might be trying to tell you that you're a writer. That business idea you keep researching but never starting, your soul might be trying to tell you that you're an entrepreneur. That difficult conversation you keep postponing, your soul might be trying to tell you that you're ready for deeper intimacy. But your ego, your survival-focused brain, your fear-based thinking, they're all trying to protect you from the vulnerability required to answer that call. And here's the tragedy. In trying to protect you from the possibility of being hurt, they're guaranteeing that you'll be hurt by never becoming who you're meant to be. The neuroscience of avoidance. Let's go deeper into what's actually happening in your brain when you choose Netflix over your novel, scrolling over studying, anything over the thing that actually matters. Dr. Antonio Damasio's research on emotional decision-making reveals something crucial. Every decision we make is emotional before it's rational. Before your conscious mind even evaluates the pros and cons of taking action, your emotional brain has already decided whether that action feels safe or threatening. When you think about doing something important, something that matters to your future, your amygdala quickly scans your memory banks for similar experiences. If it finds memories of failure, criticism, rejection, or embarrassment, it tags the current situation as dangerous and activates avoidance responses. This happens in milliseconds, long before your rational mind can intervene. By the time you're consciously thinking, I should work on my project, your emotional brain has already decided that feels unsafe and started flooding your system with subtle stress hormones that make you want to do literally anything else. Dr. Amy Arnstein's research on prefrontal cortex function shows that even mild stress can impair our executive functioning, our ability to focus, plan, and execute complex tasks. So the anxiety about doing something important actually makes us less capable of doing that important thing, which creates more anxiety, which makes us even less capable, and so on. It's a perfect neurological trap. The more something matters to you, the more anxious you feel about it. The more anxious you feel, the less capable you become of doing it well. The less capable you feel, the more you want to avoid it. The more you avoid it, the more the anxiety builds. Meanwhile, distractions offer immediate relief. Social media gives you quick hits of dopamine. Entertainment provides easy emotional regulation. Busy work offers the feeling of productivity without the threat of significance. Your brain learns, when I feel bad about my important project, I can feel better by doing something else. And every time you follow this pattern, you're strengthening the neural pathway that says, when things feel scary, avoid them. But here's where the neuroscience offers hope. Dr. Rick Hanson's research on neuroplasticity shows that we can literally rewire these patterns. Every time you do something important, despite feeling scared, you're building new neural pathways. Every time you choose courage over comfort, you're strengthening your tolerance for discomfort. The key insight from neuroscience is this: you don't have to wait for fear to go away to take action. You just have to learn to take action while fear is present. And the more you practice this, the easier it becomes. Not because the fear disappears, but because your relationship with fear transforms. Dr. Susan David's research on emotional agility reveals that trying to eliminate negative emotions often backfires. The people who are most emotionally healthy aren't those who never feel fear, anxiety, or discomfort. They're those who feel these emotions fully, but don't let these emotions control their behavior. This is where Eastern philosophy and Western psychology converge beautifully. Buddhist mindfulness teaches us to observe our emotions without being consumed by them. Stoic philosophy teaches us to focus on what we can control rather than what we can't. Modern psychology teaches us that emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. The ancient Stoics had a practice called negative visualization, imagining the worst-case scenario not to create anxiety but to build resilience. Marcus Aurelius would regularly contemplate loss, failure, and death, not because he was pessimistic, but because he understood that our fear of these things is often worse than these things themselves. When we clearly examine our worst-case scenarios, we often discover they're not as catastrophic as our imagination makes them seem. When we break down exactly what we're afraid of, we often find that we're afraid of feelings, not facts. And feelings, no matter how intense, are temporary. So, here's the breakthrough insight. You're not afraid of failure, you're afraid of how failure might make you feel. You're not afraid of judgment, you're afraid of how judgment might affect your self-worth. You're not afraid of rejection, you're afraid of the emotional experience of being rejected. But feelings, even painful ones, can't actually hurt you. They're just information. They're temporary states, not permanent truths. And once you understand this distinction, everything changes. The prison of potential. There's a special kind of suffering that comes with having unrealized potential. It's the suffering of the person who knows they're capable of more but somehow can't access that capability. It's the agony of living below your possibilities, of settling for less than you know you could be, of watching your dreams remain dreams year after year. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of fear-based avoidance. It doesn't just prevent you from achieving your goals, it prevents you from discovering who you really are. Think about it this way. Every time you avoid doing something important because you're afraid, you're choosing a smaller version of yourself. Every time you let fear make your decisions, you're choosing the identity of someone who doesn't follow through over the identity of someone who goes after what they want. But here's what's really happening at a deeper level. You're choosing the pain of regret over the pain of risk. You're choosing the familiar suffering of staying the same over the uncertain discomfort of growth. You're choosing the devil you know over the angel you could become. Dr. Sherry Turkle's research on identity formation shows that we become who we are through our actions more than our intentions. Your identity isn't formed by what you think about yourself, it's formed by what you consistently do. If you consistently avoid challenges, you become someone who avoids challenges. If you consistently choose comfort over growth, you become someone who prioritizes comfort over growth. The tragedy is that most people have far more potential than they ever realize because they never push themselves to the edge of their capabilities. They never discover what they are truly capable of because they're too afraid to risk finding out they might not be capable of as much as they hoped. But potential isn't just about achievement. It's about aliveness. It's about the feeling of expansion that comes from growing beyond your current limitations. It's about the deep satisfaction of becoming more than you were. When you consistently avoid the things that scare you, you don't just miss out on external success. You miss out on internal growth. You don't just fail to achieve your goals, you fail to become the person who could achieve those goals. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine two versions of yourself. One version spends the next 5 years avoiding everything that feels scary, risky, or uncertain. The other version spends the next 5 years consistently moving toward what matters despite feeling scared. Which version do you think would be happier? Which version do you think would feel more alive? Which version do you think would have more interesting stories to tell, more depth of character, more resilience in the face of challenges? The path of avoidance doesn't just cost you opportunities, it costs you the chance to discover your own strength. It doesn't just prevent external achievement, it prevents internal development. It doesn't just keep you safe, it keeps you small. And, the cruel irony is that the safety you're trying to preserve by avoiding risk is often just an illusion. The world, it's changing whether you participate or not. Industries, well, they're evolving whether you adapt or not. Life is moving forward whether you're growing or not. Standing still isn't actually safe. It just creates the illusion of safety while everything around you continues to change. The person who refuses to take any risks often ends up experiencing the biggest risk of all, the risk of irrelevance, of stagnation, of looking back on life with regret instead of satisfaction. The courage beneath the fear. But here's what most people miss about courage. It's not the absence of fear. It's intimacy with fear. It's getting so familiar with your fears that they lose their power to control you. Courage isn't feeling fearless, it's feeling terrified and showing up anyway. Real courage looks like this. You feel the familiar anxiety rising as you think about doing the important thing. Your heart starts racing. Your mind starts generating all the reasons why now isn't the right time. Your body starts looking for escape routes. And instead of fighting these feelings or judging them or trying to make them go away, you acknowledge them. Hello, fear, I see you're here. I understand you're trying to protect me. Thank you for caring about my well-being, and I'm going to do this anyway. This isn't about becoming reckless. This isn't about ignoring legitimate concerns. This is about learning to distinguish between realistic caution and paralyzing fear, between healthy prudence and self-sabotaging avoidance. Dr. Susan Jeffers, in her groundbreaking work on fear, discovered something remarkable. The fear never really goes away. Successful people don't become fearless, they become comfortable with being afraid. They develop what she calls fear tolerance, the ability to feel fear without being paralyzed by it. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more you practice doing things while scared, the less scary they become. Not because they become objectively less risky, but because you develop confidence in your ability to handle whatever happens. You start to realize that you've survived 100% of your worst days so far. You start to see that most of your fears were worse in anticipation than in reality. You start to understand that you're more resilient than you thought, more capable than you imagined, stronger than you knew. But there's an even deeper transformation that happens. You start to see fear as excitement wearing a disguise. The physiological response to fear and excitement are nearly identical: elevated heart rate, increased adrenaline, heightened awareness. The only difference is the story you tell yourself about what these sensations mean. Dr. Alison Woodbrook's research on anxiety reappraisal shows that telling yourself "I'm excited" instead of "I'm anxious" can immediately improve performance. The sensations are the same, but the interpretation transforms the experience. What if that nervous energy you feel before doing something important isn't your body trying to stop you? What if it's your body trying to prepare you? What if anxiety isn't a warning that you're in danger? What if it's a signal that you're about to do something significant? What if the butterflies in your stomach aren't telling you to run away? What if they're telling you to pay attention because something meaningful is about to happen? This reframe doesn't eliminate the discomfort, but it transforms your relationship with discomfort. Instead of seeing it as something to avoid, you start seeing it as something to move through. Instead of interpreting it as a sign that you're not ready, you start recognizing it as a sign that you're about to grow. Now comes the practical question. How do you actually retrain your brain to move toward what scares you instead of away from it? How do you build the courage muscle that's been atrophied by years of avoidance? Start with microdosing discomfort. You don't build physical strength by immediately trying to lift the heaviest weight in the gym. You start with a weight that challenges you but doesn't overwhelm you, and you gradually increase the load as you get stronger. The same principle applies to emotional strength. Start with actions that feel mildly uncomfortable but not terrifying. Send that text you've been putting off. Make that phone call you've been avoiding. Have that small, difficult conversation. Each time you do something despite feeling scared, you're building evidence that you can handle discomfort. You're teaching your brain that fear doesn't have to equal inaction. You're slowly expanding your comfort zone by gently stretching its edges. Practice the 20-second rule. Psychologist Mel Robbins discovered that your brain will start generating excuses to avoid doing something important within 20 seconds of thinking about it. The key is to physically move towards the action before your brain can talk you out of it. Don't think about whether you feel like writing. Just open the document. Don't debate whether you're ready to make the call. Just pick up the phone. Don't analyze whether it's the perfect time to start exercising. Just put on your workout clothes. Movement creates momentum, and momentum overcomes fear. Use the next smallest step principle. Fear often feels overwhelming because we focus on the entire journey instead of just the next step. Instead of thinking, I need to write a book, just think, I need to write one sentence. Instead of thinking, I need to start a business, try thinking, I need to research one potential customer. Big goals feel abstract and, honestly, pretty intimidating. Small actions, on the other hand, feel concrete and manageable. And every small action you complete actually builds confidence for the next small action. Develop fear-sitting skills. This is a practice from Buddhist meditation that's been adapted for practical use. When you feel that familiar anxiety about doing something important, instead of immediately seeking distraction, just sit with the feeling for 2 minutes. Notice where you feel it in your body. Notice what thoughts come up. Notice the urge to escape. But don't escape, just observe, just breathe, just stay present with the discomfort. What you'll discover is that feelings, even really intense ones, have a natural life cycle. They rise, they peak, and then they naturally begin to fall if you don't feed them with resistance or distraction. Fear that feels overwhelming when you're fighting, it often becomes manageable when you're simply observing it. Create implementation intentions. Dr. Peter Gollwitz's research shows that people are much more likely to follow through on their goals when they create specific if-then plans. For example, if it's 9 a.m., then I will work on my project for 25 minutes. Or, if I feel the urge to check social media, then I will take 3 deep breaths and return to my task. These pre-made decisions, they really help bypass that moment of choice where fear usually intervenes. Instead of having to decide in the moment whether you feel like doing the important thing, you've already decided. Your job is just to follow the plan. Build accountability structures. Fear, well, it really thrives in isolation. It's just so much easier to avoid something when no one else knows you're avoiding it. But when you make your commitments visible to others, when you tell someone what you're working on, and when you plan to complete it, avoidance becomes much more difficult. This isn't about external pressure, it's about external support. When other people know what you're trying to accomplish, they can encourage you when you're struggling, celebrate your progress, and help you stay connected to why your goal matters. Practice self-compassion. Dr. Kristin Neff's research shows that self-compassion is actually more effective than self-discipline for long-term behavior change. When you judge yourself harshly for avoiding something, you create additional negative emotions that make the task feel even more threatening. But when you treat yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a good friend who was struggling, you create emotional safety that makes action more possible. Instead of saying, "I'm so lazy, I can't believe I'm avoiding this again," try, "I notice I'm feeling scared about this. And that's understandable given how much it matters to me. What would help me feel safe enough to take one small step?" The identity shift that changes everything. Here's where we get to the heart of the matter. The deepest transformation happens not when you learn new productivity techniques, but when you change your fundamental identity. From "I am someone who procrastinates" to "I am someone who feels scared and does important things anyway." From "I am lazy" to "I am sensitive to emotional discomfort and I'm learning to work with that sensitivity." From "I lack willpower" to "I'm developing courage," which is willpower in the presence of fear. From "I can't get motivated" to "I'm learning that motivation follows action, not the other way around." This identity shift is crucial because, we tend to act in accordance with our self-concept. If you see yourself as lazy, you'll continue to act lazy because that's consistent with your identity. If you see yourself as someone who struggles with fear but is learning to be brave, you'll start acting brave because that's who you're becoming. Dr. James Clear's research on habit formation shows that the most sustainable behavior changes come from identity changes. People who successfully transform their lives don't just change what they do, they change who they believe they are. The smoker who quits permanently doesn't just stop smoking, they stop identifying as a smoker. The person who becomes fit doesn't just start exercising, they start identifying as someone who prioritizes their health. The writer who publishes their work doesn't just write more, they start identifying as a writer. So, who are you becoming? Are you becoming someone who lets fear make their decisions, or someone who feels fear and makes decisions anyway? Are you becoming someone who avoids discomfort at all costs, or someone who moves through discomfort toward what matters? Are you becoming someone who waits for the perfect moment, or someone who creates moments of imperfect action? Are you becoming someone who talks about their dreams, or someone who builds their dreams one scared step at a time? Oh, the beautiful thing about identity is that it's not fixed. It's not determined by your past. It's created by your choices, moment by moment, decision by decision. Every time you choose courage over comfort, you're voting for the identity of someone brave. Every time you act despite feeling scared, you're becoming someone who acts despite feeling scared. And here's the secret that changes everything. You don't have to believe you're brave to act brave. You just have to act brave, and the belief will follow. You don't have to feel confident to do confident things. You just have to do confident things, and the confidence will develop. Dr. Amy Cuddy's research on embodied cognition shows that our actions can actually change our internal state. When we act with courage, our brain starts producing the neurochemicals associated with courage. When we behave like someone who believes in themselves, our self-belief begins to align with our behavior. This is why fake it till you make it actually works. Not because you're being fake, but because you're trying on a new identity until it becomes natural. You're practicing being the person you want to become until that practice becomes who you are. The compound effect of courage. So here's what happens when you start consistently choosing action over avoidance, courage over comfort, and growth over safety. First, your tolerance for discomfort expands. What used to feel overwhelming starts to feel manageable. What used to send you into avoidance starts to feel like a normal part of growth. Your emotional range increases. You can handle more uncertainty, more complexity, and more intensity without shutting down. Second, your self-trust deepens. Every time you do something despite feeling scared, you prove to yourself that you can be counted on. You develop what psychologists call self-efficacy, the belief that you can influence events that affect your life. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of your circumstances and start seeing yourself as an active agent in creating your circumstances. Third, your relationship with failure transforms. When you're regularly taking risks, failure stops being this rare, catastrophic event and becomes normal feedback. You start to see failure not as evidence of inadequacy, but as evidence of effort, not as a reflection of your worth, but as information about what to try next. Fourth, you develop what researchers call anti-fragility. This is a concept from Nassim Taleb's work, the idea that some systems don't just survive stress, they actually get stronger from it. When you regularly practice doing difficult things, you don't just become more resilient, you become someone who thrives under pressure. Fifth, you start inspiring others. When people see you consistently moving toward what scares you, it gives them permission to do the same. Your courage becomes contagious. Your willingness to be vulnerable makes others feel safe to be vulnerable too. But perhaps most importantly, you start experiencing what psychologists call eudaimonic happiness. The deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your values, from developing your potential, from becoming who you're meant to be. This is different from hedonic happiness, the pleasure that comes from comfort, entertainment, or avoiding discomfort. Hedonic happiness is temporary and requires constant reinforcement. Eudaimonic happiness is sustainable because it comes from alignment between your actions and your deepest values. The person who avoids what scares them might feel temporarily safe, but they rarely feel deeply satisfied. The person who moves toward what scares them might feel temporarily uncomfortable, but they develop lasting fulfillment. Here's the compound effect. Every act of courage makes the next act of courage easier. Every time you do something, despite feeling scared, you build momentum that carries forward. Every small step outside your comfort zone expands your comfort zone permanently. After a year of consistently choosing courage over comfort, you look back and realize you're living a completely different life. Not because you became fearless, but because you became intimate with fear. Not because you stopped feeling scared, but because you stopped letting scared make your decisions. And the most beautiful part, the things you were most afraid of, failure, judgment, rejection, start to lose their power over you, not because they become impossible, but because you discover you can handle them. Not because they stop being uncomfortable, but because you develop comfort with discomfort. The revolution of self-understanding. What we've discovered here isn't just about productivity or achievement, it's about understanding one of the deepest patterns of human psychology. We often sabotage what we want most because getting it would require us to change, and change feels dangerous to the part of our brain that's focused on survival. But here's the revolutionary insight. Once you understand that your avoidance is fear-based rather than character-based, everything changes. You stop judging yourself for being human and start working with your humanity. You stop fighting your brain and start partnering with it. The voice that's been calling you lazy for years can finally be heard for what it really is. Scared, and scared can be helped. Scared can be comforted. Scared can be gradually shown that the thing it's afraid of isn't actually dangerous. Lazy, on the other hand, implies something fundamentally wrong with your character. Scared implies something fundamentally human about your experience. This shift in understanding doesn't just change your behavior, it changes your entire relationship with yourself. You stop being your own enemy and start becoming your own ally. You stop judging your struggles and start understanding them. You stop fighting your resistance and start getting curious about what it's trying to protect. And here's where it gets really powerful. When you understand that your laziness is actually fear, you can start addressing the real issue. When you know what you're actually afraid of, you can start developing strategies to work with that fear rather than against it. You can't motivate your way out of laziness because laziness isn't a motivation problem, it's a fear problem. But you can courage your way out of fear because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in the presence of fear. This understanding also changes how you see others who struggle with similar patterns. Instead of judging them for lacking discipline, you can see them as fellow humans struggling with fear. Instead of being frustrated by their avoidance, you can have compassion for their protection strategies. The colleague who never follows through on their ideas isn't lazy. They might be terrified of not being good enough. The friend who talks about their goals but never acts on them isn't undisciplined. They might be scared of what success would require of them. The family member who has so much potential but never seems to use it isn't wasting their life. They might be protecting themselves from the vulnerability that comes with trying. When you see the fear beneath the avoidance in yourself and others, you can respond with wisdom instead of judgment, with strategy instead of criticism, with compassion instead of frustration. So here we are at the moment of choice. You now understand that what you've been calling laziness is actually fear. You know that your avoidance patterns are protection strategies, not character flaws. You see that your brain has been trying to keep you safe, even when safety has become its own form of prison. The question is, what are you going to do with this understanding? Are you going to use this knowledge to be more compassionate with yourself while staying exactly the same? Or are you going to use it as the foundation for becoming someone different? Because understanding why you avoid things is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you start consistently choosing courage over comfort, growth over safety, significance over security. So, you now understand that what you've been calling laziness is actually fear. You know that your avoidance patterns are protection strategies, not character flaws. You see that your brain has been trying to keep you safe, even when safety has become its own form of prison. The question is, what are you going to do with this understanding? Are you going to use this knowledge to be more compassionate with yourself while staying exactly the same? Or are you going to use it as the foundation for becoming someone different? Because understanding why you avoid things is just the beginning. The real transformation happens when you start consistently choosing courage over comfort, growth over safety, significance over security. Here's your invitation for the next 30 days. Every single day, do one thing that scares you. Not recklessly dangerous things, intelligently challenging things, things that matter to your growth, your goals, your development as a human being. Send that email you've been drafting in your head for weeks. Start that project you've been researching for months. Have that conversation you've been avoiding for years. Take that small step toward the bigger dream that feels too big to pursue all at once. And when you feel the familiar fear rising, when your brain starts generating all the reasons why this isn't the right time, when your body starts looking for escape routes, remember this: you're not broken, you're not lazy, you're not lacking in willpower or discipline or motivation. You're just scared. And scared is something you can work with. Scared is temporary. Scared is workable. Scared is the price of admission to a life that matters. Every person who's ever done anything meaningful has felt exactly what you're feeling right now. Every innovator, every artist, every entrepreneur, every person who's ever created positive change in the world has stood at the edge of their comfort zone, feeling terrified and chosen to jump anyway. The fear you feel isn't evidence that you're not ready. It's evidence that you're human. The anxiety you experience isn't proof that you should wait. It's proof that what you're considering matters to you. Your fear is not your enemy. Your fear is your teacher. It's showing you exactly where your growth lives. It's pointing you toward the experiences that will transform you from who you are into who you're capable of becoming. But fear is also a terrible master. When you let it make your decisions, it will consistently choose what feels safe over what actually serves you. It will consistently choose the familiar over the meaningful, the comfortable over the transformative, the small over the significant. The choice is yours. You can continue to let fear disguised as laziness dictate your choices, or you can start making choices that honor both your fear and your potential. You can keep waiting for courage to arrive, or you can start acting with the courage you already have, the courage it takes to acknowledge that you're scared, the courage it takes to be honest about what you're avoiding, the courage it takes to try something new despite not knowing how it will turn out. Because here's the final truth. You already have everything you need to start. You don't need more confidence. You need to act without confidence and let the confidence build through action. You don't need to feel ready. You need to start before you feel ready and let readiness develop through practice. You don't need to stop being scared. You just need to stop letting scared make all your decisions. The life you want is waiting on the other side of the fear you're avoiding. The person you're meant to become is hiding behind the actions you're afraid to take. The dreams that feel too big, too risky, too uncertain, they're not too much for you. They're exactly the right size to help you grow into who you're supposed to be. Your fear isn't evidence that you can't do it. Your fear is evidence that it matters. So feel the fear, acknowledge it, thank it for trying to protect you, and then, do the thing anyway. Because honestly, you're not lazy, you're just scared. And scared people who act anyway, well, they change the world. Right now, in this moment, you're at a crossroads. Behind you is the familiar path of avoidance, the comfortable prison of unrealized potential, the safe but small life of waiting for courage to arrive before you act. Ahead of you is uncertainty, discomfort, the possibility of failure, judgment, and all the things your brain has been trying to protect you from. But also ahead of you is growth, discovery, and the chance to find out who you really are when you stop hiding from yourself. The path forward isn't about becoming fearless. It's about becoming fear-friendly. It's about developing a new relationship with discomfort, uncertainty, and risk. It's about learning that the sensations you've been interpreting as warnings might actually be invitations. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, you'll have the same choice you've had every morning. Listen to the voice that says, you're too lazy, too undisciplined, too lacking in willpower, or listen to the voice that says, you're scared and that's okay and you can do this anyway. Choose the second voice. Choose understanding over judgment. Choose compassion over criticism. Choose action over analysis. Choose to see your avoidance as protection that's no longer serving you rather than as evidence of personal failure. Choose to interpret your anxiety as excitement about growth rather than as a warning about danger. And, choose to trust that you can handle whatever happens when you step outside your comfort zone because you've been handling difficult things your entire life. The story you tell yourself about yourself is, honestly, the most important story you'll ever tell. For too long, you've been telling yourself a story about laziness, lack of discipline, and character flaws. But now you know the real story. You're a sensitive, intelligent human being whose brain has been trying to protect you from emotional discomfort, and, well, that protection has become its own form of prison. But protection can become empowerment, fear can become fuel, avoidance can become approach. The very sensitivity that makes you afraid of failure can actually make you excellent at what you choose to pursue. The very care that makes you afraid of judgment can, make you exceptional at creating value for others. The very intensity that makes you afraid of disappointing people can make you extraordinary at exceeding their expectations. Your fear isn't a bug in your system, it's a feature that just needs better management. And the management starts now. Not when you feel ready, not when you have more confidence, not when the circumstances are perfect. Now. While you're scared, while you're uncertain, while you're still figuring it out, because courage isn't about waiting for fear to leave. It's about leaving with your fear as a companion rather than a dictator. Your laziness was never laziness. It was fear wearing a disguise. And now that you see through the disguise, you can finally address what's really going on. You're not lazy, you're scared, and scared people who act anyway, they're the ones who discover what they're truly capable of. The timer starts now. What are you going to do with this understanding? What action are you going to take while your fear is still trying to talk you out of it? Your future self is waiting to meet the person who feels afraid and shows up anyway. The only question is, how long are you going to make them wait? The choice is yours. The moment is now. The fear is just fear. And you? You're so much more than your fear has ever let you believe.